this section, in order of appearance, you will hear statements from Don McGilvery, John Shaw, Jim Kelly, and Rosemary Hutchison. In some respects, the Scottish culture is neglected and forgotten, almost to the point where we may be on the verge of losing a very vital part to our Highland culture, that is, the Gaelic language.
Gilvery, perhaps you could tell me what the state of the Gaelic culture is in Cape Breton at present day.
Well, it's like all cultures, it's continually changing. I guess it's, and again, it's probably fairly vibrant, but it's under siege in the area.
What do you mean it's under siege?
Well, many of these older traditions and values, in many respects, have been subjected in Cape Breton, certainly since large-scale industrialization and the transformation of the pre-industrial, somewhat crafting community, if you will, of the Highlands and Islands who came over here, into industrial workers. The fact that they managed to maintain, even within the industrial areas, a fair bit of the culture is in spite of, not because of, the conditions under which they had to adjust to. Granted now, in the rural areas, the culture would be stronger still. But it's decreasing, certainly the language, which is the basis of it, is decreasing very rapidly. Tremendous decreases since the 1940s. And if present trends continue, it could well disappear within a generation or two.
Well, as far as a census is concerned, I don't think that any accurate census has been done on how many people actually speak Gaelic in Cape Breton. I think the most, one thing that should be emphasized is the age groupings as far as language is concerned. And that comes down to the point that few, very, very few, if any, people under 30 or even 40 can converse in the language. So that means if things continue this way, there's not going to be much Gaelic spoken, say, after the next 30 years.
From the, let's say, the nemesis of, Cape Breton industrialization, the turn of the century, there began a rapid decline. Maybe even before that, maybe in the 1880s, a rapid decline in the numbers of Gaelic speakers according to statisticians. And I think this is accounted for not so much by the steel plant and the coal field operations here, by British industrialists, but even before that with an overpopulation problem.
It may be questioned just how significant language is to the survival of a culture, but it cannot be denied that language is very important and may well be the core of our culture. Without language, the culture would suffer.
Today, what would you say is the most important aspect of the Gaelic culture in Cape Breton?
The language,
The language
itself. I feel strongly that if the language goes, the rest of the trappings will too. The songs will go, the stories, and the things that remain will be somewhat superficial without a strong basis in the language itself.
When I was seen speaking Gaelic years ago, and people found out where I was from, that I wasn't raised speaking it, and so on, they'd say, why are you doing this? What's the point? And I didn't really know at the time, but I think what it was just acquiring key to a culture, which may have a lot to teach us.
In Cape Breton, the Gaelic language is in a state of concern. The reason is not because there is a lack of Gaelic speakers in Cape Breton, but because there is not enough Gaelic being spoken, and perhaps more importantly, there is a general lack of effort and support to keep the language alive.
Up until the 19th century, we're talking about literally tens of thousands of people speaking Gaelic in Cape Breton Island. There was even a point, although I can't tell you the exact time, but there was even a point that's historically verifiable where there were more Gaelic-speaking people living on the island of Cape Breton and the neighboring northeastern counties of the mainland Nova Scotia, speaking Gaelic than there were in all the Highlands and Islands of Scotland.
Is that a fact?
You know, due to the same forces that sort of, you know, propelled them out of the Scottish Highlands and Islands to various parts of the world, including this area.
I continually keep getting surprised by the places where I find Gaelic. Generally, I'd say from the work that I do, which is going all over the island, going into Gaelic-speaking homes and collecting folklore, I'd say that the real strength of Gaelic in the island is in the rural areas, and it will continue to be there because they have the cultural associations there. And you'll notice in the industrial areas that all of the Gaelic speakers you meet there originally were raised out in the country. As for the rural areas where Gaelic is strong, few that I'd mention are right here in the southern Inverness County is one. There's quite a bit of Gaelic spoken near Mabu, Judic, considerable amount near Gabroos and along the Myra. That's in Cape Breton County. There's some spoken in Middle River. I think I got about I talked to the last few people who actually were raised speaking Gaelic there. Grand River, there's still some people who speak excellent Gaelic. Catalone was a place that has surprised me very much. And the rural areas around Sydney, such as East Bay, McAdams Lake. It's not used as much as it could be, and as much as it would be natural to use it. And I think once this trend were reversed, and people realize that Gaelic is just as sophisticated a language as any other language, and it can adapt to any 20th century situation, and that it should, then I think that the language will be in a much stronger position than it is now. And in this connection, I think that the media have a lot to answer for.
Money situation, more than a lack of interest. I think most people would agree that the language and the culture should be kept, and effort should be made to sustain it. But when it comes to spending money on the Gaelic culture rather than spending it on creating jobs for the unemployed, then the money gets spent elsewhere.
The decline of the language was speeded up by the teachers who punished pupils for speaking it, and by parents who discouraged their children from wasting time on Gaelic. In the past, several attempts have been made to halt the decline. For example, the year 1939 marked the opening of the Gaelic College in St. Anne's. The college is an institution designed to encourage the teaching of Gaelic and to revive the traditional Highland crafts such as the weaving of tartans. In 1972, several events indicated a revival of interest in Gaelic and a concern for its continuing existence as an important facet of Cape Breton life. Today, this concern remains, the difference being that the situation has become desperate.
What do you think the present state of the language is now in Cape Breton?
It's fairly desperate. I'd say it needs a lot of work at this point. We're very much touch and go with it. I wouldn't think that there's anyone in Cape Breton at this time who has only Gaelic. So English has reached all of the Gaelic speakers at this time. There are very few native Gaelic speakers in Cape Breton who are under 30, maybe even very few who are under 50. And at that point, the language is in dire straits.
The question at this point is what can be done to preserve the Gaelic language. The answer may lie with the younger people and various teaching methods that can be made available. It is believed that if the language was introduced at a young age, it would be a starting point for the preservation of the Gaelic language.
Why are people under 30 not speaking Gaelic?
That's a good question. I was talking to a person who's doing a sociological study of the end of Gaelic in Cape Breton, and I asked, she'd done taken a systematic look at that, and I asked her what the factors were, and she seemed to think it was a combination of things, and there were things that have been pretty obvious to most of us. One main cause was economic. Probably the Depression had some kind of effect. Since about 1880, people have been leaving the country, and it just got to the point where there weren't enough people there to maintain the practice of speaking the language to children. And there was also the, I don't know whether you want to call it the conviction or the illusion that having Gaelic was a liability as far as moving upwards in society was concerned, which was something that a lot of people here, especially in this century, have been convinced is a desirable thing. So one way or another, whether it's been education or the media or just the general drift of a lot of people's thought at the same time, the idea of Gaelic and the idea of bettering one's place in society have drifted apart.
We tend to preserve the language, like you mentioned, it's coming into its own, like it's going back to an oral culture again.
Well, I didn't say that exactly. What I meant to say was that the teaching techniques, the way that the language is presented, is more in keeping with the way the culture actually is. I wouldn't say that Gaelic is coming into its own in any sense right now. I haven't seen any evidence for that. But I think the teaching methods are probably much more accurately reflect the strengths of the Gaelic language and the Gaelic culture.
I see. So could you see any way that you could make Gaelic come into its own?
Yes. I think that to say that Gaelic is dying, is in any kind of, quote, terminal phase, is simply to reject the responsibility that people should assume for the culture here. I think it's sidestepping the whole issue. I think that as far as bringing Gaelic back is concerned, or I prefer to say maintaining the use of Gaelic, because I'm not too convinced yet by the effectiveness of the various Gaelic revivals that have occurred on both sides of the Atlantic. I think the sky's the limit, really, as far as bringing it back is concerned. And what we have to look at is the various advantages, the various things that can be turned to the advantage of Gaelic that didn't exist before. Not only in the fields of education, new techniques of language teaching and so on, but also in the fields of electronics. And I think that this may probably be, it could be a crucial factor in maintaining Gaelic here in Cape Breton. Specifically using cassette tapes to pass around stories because that will put the most, what I consider to be the central part of Gaelic culture in a place where people have access to it. In other words, the oral tradition that Gaelic has. And we hope soon to have traveling libraries which lend out cassette tapes of old traditional stories, songs, and that kind of thing, so that people will be exposed to this. Eventually, maybe videotapes that can be used in schools, or when the equipment is accessible to ordinary people, can be played in the homes, where you could have, again, singers, storytellers, fiddlers, whatever. There was a talk given at the Gaelic College in Scotland a few years ago by Micheál O'Houlihan from the west of Ireland, who was with RTE, and this was what he maintained, that the use of electronics to make culture more accessible to masses of people was much more important than printing a large number of books, because Gaelic people generally don't read Gaelic. It's the exceptional person who can read Gaelic, but they will put on cassettes. I use cassettes all the time in my teaching, and in my collecting I very often send people cassettes of fragments of songs and so on to see if I can get additional verses, and the reaction is almost always a very positive one. People can relate to that. They hear it, which is the way they've absorbed Gaelic before, and that they think in those terms. So people will make the effort and remember the verses and so on. I think that's probably where the real potential is. The other thing that I found quite effective using in Scotland is videotapes, where the teacher is there on the TV screen speaking. You can see his lips, you can see his gestures. What they used in Scotland was really just the beginning of what I hope would be a very sophisticated program later on. But it worked very, very well.
I see. That makes sense.
And of course there's radio and TV.
The Gaelic language is in a state of concern, but there is still hope that it can be maintained, if not totally revived.
That I've noticed that is a resource that's been maybe wasted, thrown away, is using the traditional forms of entertainment, storytelling and so on. There's still some excellent storytellers in Cape Breton, but very few people to listen to them. If that could be given, those aspects of Gaelic culture could be given more of an airing, I think that some crucial bridges might be built, specifically toward the younger people who haven't had access to Gaelic. What they've seen of Highland culture on the media has been so far away from the reality that even if their close relatives speak it, the reality frightens them. They've been frightened away from this. I mean, as I understand now, here locally, Gaelic still doesn't have the same status in the secondary education institution here in Cape Breton as other languages, say French. So I think that if young people had direct contact this way, that they would begin to want to learn to speak Gaelic.
Looking at the situation positively, it can be said that there is a renewed awareness in Cape Breton, and with any hope this will strengthen instead of weakening. It is the survival of the Gaelic language as much as anything else that ranks Cape Breton as an outpost of Scottish Highland culture. Although the Gaelic language in Cape Breton is in a state of concern, the opposite can be said for Gaelic music. It has always been an essential part of Highlanders' culture, for it did much to relieve the drudgery of settling in a new land.
In the material culture, in other words, the work that people did and so on. As far back as Samuel Johnson's trip to the Hebrides, which was in the 18th century, he remarked that whenever people worked, Gaelic-speaking people worked, they sang. And that's why there are all these work songs in Gaelic. The habit was to make up a song for pretty much every important event that happened. And until very recently, there are people in Cape Breton who continued this and did it very well.
For example, the old traditional walking or milling songs made the task of curing the cloth much more enjoyable for those taking part. Today, although the process is not carried out for its true purpose, the traditional milling frolic is still alive in Cape Breton and performed for pure enjoyment.
You'd be able to explain to us what a milling frolic does.
Well, what you see here and what you're hearing here represents hundreds of years of tradition emanating out of crofting industries, where after the sheep had been sheared and the wool had been carded and so on and so forth, it was spun into broadcloth, a very coarse, thick, and unmanageable material. And the tradition was born out of the Highlands and the Hebrides of Scotland, transported here along with Gaelic and the Scottish Highland culture, several hundred years ago. The tradition now in Cape Breton is essentially a kind of a token tradition. That is to say that people don't actually cure the cloth, but as you see here with this long table. Normally there were 5 people on one side, 5 people on the other side, and local bards and poets would compose songs and poems to accompany the motion of curing the broadcloth to make it pliable and manageable.
So that's why they were beating it on the table.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
In Scotland, it's called walking, or walking music, or the walking songs. And in Cape Breton, it's called the milling songs, or the milling, from whence comes the milling frolic. Still very popular, very much alive in Cape Breton Island, probably a lot more so than it is in Scotland.
Do they use the songs for other working jobs too?
These songs are specifically oriented towards milling and the tradition of milling. But as well, there are songs here that have been composed by local people in Cape Breton for lovemaking, for quarreling, for milking, for fighting, for fishing, drawing nets, for haymaking, songs of every manner and description, and poems as well.
And they only go with the action that you're doing.
That's right. Yeah, they're very specific oriented. They're specific.
of the Milling Frolic represent only a small portion of Scottish music in Cape Breton, for the Highland music found in Cape Breton is very diversified. Every year there are numerous music festivals going on throughout the island, all of which present the best of Scottish talent, everything from piping to dancing to Gaelic singing.
This music has become available to people. People were making records as far back as the 30s, which were played on the radio, and became inspired other people to learn to play.
Would you say that fiddle music is popular in Cape Breton?
Oh yes, yes, no doubt about it. To me at all. In some places more than in others, and in some parts of the year more than others, but I think it's extremely popular. And as a matter of fact, I think that the revival, if you want to call it that, I would call it that, of fiddle music here in Cape Breton, culturally is the most hopeful thing that I've seen happen here. I think it's one of the things that convinced me that Gaelic can be maintained here. Because within a period of less than 10 years, you've got the interest going, you've got people playing, acquiring what is a very difficult skill, working at it, and having a tremendous time doing it.
There will be performances by Mike McDougall and Donald Angus Beaton in Glendale, Highland Village Pipe Band, Iona, Harvey Beaton and Jim Watson, and Danny Graham Dance Group at Judic.
that as far as the fiddling style is concerned here in Cape Breton, that once the language goes, if it does, that the what's called the blas in Gaelic, the taste of the Cape Breton style of fiddling, which is a Gaelic style of fiddling, will change or be lost. And whether this is due to the rhythms in Gaelic that come out in the music, which I think is probably true, although it wouldn't be very easy to document, whatever it's due to, I think that it's probably a very true observation. And as you can still notice that some of most of the fiddlers who play in the old style, like Matty Alstadil from McKinnon's Brook, Inverness County, John Willie Campbell, people who have the old style of playing are generally Gaelic speaking.
Oh, can we talk about the film music for a minute? And I'm just, the Gaelic, I guess we'll start with the Gaelic song. Is there a distinctive Cape Breton taste to the Gaelic music, its Gaelic song?
The fiddle music?
Mm-hmm. Or
Yes.
the Gaelic
Yes.
singing, too? Also
the Gaelic singing would be a little harder to generalize on.
Oh, I see.
Because styles of singing I found differ from place to place. Here in Inverness County, there's a certain style of singing.
I see. Is it the dialect? Like, would that have a lot to do with it?
I'd say that it pretty much follows dialect lines.
I see.
But that's very much different from the North Shore style of singing. And you'll get songs which you find here in one air and there in a different air, in the same with verses. There's a different style, or used to be down on the Myra, Grand Myra, and Framboise, and places like that.
I see. Okay.
But for fiddle, the real cradle of Cape Breton fiddling is in Inverness County. And that fiddle style is distinctive as compared to what existed in Scotland. And probably most of the styles that are played in Scotland now were superimposed with a heavy classical influence after people left the west of Scotland to come here to Cape Breton. What was brought here was a Western Scottish Highland fiddle tradition, which I think has been kept pretty faithfully. I went back and I was in Scotland in 1977 and found one old man on the west coast from a place which would have been pretty close to the center of migration to Cape Breton, who played fiddle, and his style of fiddle playing, because of putting in the cuts and so on, was the closest thing that I'd heard in Scotland to Cape Breton fiddle playing. So that's my own, that's the way I interpret the origin of the kind of music that's played here. And if you look back in the manuscripts, the old tunes during what was called the Golden Age of fiddle music in the 18th century, you'll find notations which represent what people do here, but what has been lost in Scotland.
Let us give a big welcome to Mr. Jim Watson.
Bojaw machlum chiliag, vi chiliag a hiliag, bojaw machlum chiliag a rihish gan hul. Alla hjalten a grinjak, a gach mi fobolat, botach machlum fodjach, an kujach maroon. Gata mi ambliana, en ik milan jeruai, vriaun, reges rieslas, haniach mina shar. Hartelijk meer djurgen en komen wat hiatach. Bij Meijer smovian avihias leven dras. Germola dachami gach wala gach mi. Hanjel sum voor de mandrasta waf horstet kjol. Hanjel akan javarstjok. A eentje sandan goev gach boy het match. Sanjach marach leach. Shake ik breed en dan natjas fuvian met habach kanchal en asaya hapon manjol. Lehul jan artors de going shala har sala. Het lim voor veel pata het kara pohjol. Når hikagan saurad bovoyat samnamshen, and duljak efraun kernan bountan and glor. Evrunchen and glauntan gat wulsam esnjoman, go gagak krampjana, fanavoi eskodam. Sleintje smjorig var gegans en afvatink jechen, schein loin je gan utdam, Sakela na kor, et kranch kagas vrelan o anaka vrileni, agrian siereri kurspedich skachor. And do locha yauri vegayer gangauncher, noch renicha ganriam yanek down sagas kjol. Go sul me san amsha, go feich me san jammer. A hood of big aljum sat banjin man boy. Ik bad ich jelis bovian om de geisach. Maar jeensje gaat skiën, het gaat trainen de hal. Maar het zat richela hans gaat groeien, plaatsen zeker. Nach rom na het van grei nacht. Dan kochwan Bojaw machlum chiliag vi chiliag a hiliag Bojaw machlum chiliag a rish kan ful Alla hjalten a krinjak a gach mi fobolat Botash machlum fodjach an kujach maroon Happily
believe that there's a very profound relationship between Gaelic language and traditional Highland Scottish music. Where it's most obvious is in what's called Portuguese, which is mouth music, which is the tunes that were kept for for the traditional tunes, which is the words that were kept for the traditional tunes. You get them for fiddle tunes, and you also get them for pipe tunes. Even some of the very old ones that were composed, say, by the McCrimmons, have Gaelic words. And they serve to help a person remember not only the tune, but the timing. In tunes like Strathspeys, where the timing can be quite complicated. If you know the way the words go, where the long vowels are and the short vowels, then you'll always have the tune correctly as it was made. Not only that, but some Gaelic words in these Portuguese can tell you where the cuts go for the fiddlers. You've seen this da-da-da like that. Well, that's reproduced in the Gaelic words in a large number of tunes, and it can tell you where the cuts should go. I don't know that that happens in every case because I haven't done any great amount of work on it, but one of my informants pointed it out to me, and of course once you see it, it's so obvious. So I think that the language tends to reinforce the music, and the other way around. I think in general, the way I understand Gaelic culture and the position I've always dealt from in my collecting and also in teaching is that all of these facets of Gaelic culture are interrelated. In other words, the language is related to the music, it's related to the songs on the other side. In traditional Gaelic singing, the words are every bit as important as the air, and there were, until recently, there are no songs that I know of that were, no poetry that I know of that was composed without an air to it.
Unlike the language, the music of our Scottish culture is not being pushed aside. However, there is concern whether or not the music will survive without the language.
Thank you very much.